Rondel, nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you too. Thank you very
Sure.
much for inviting me.
Yes, I'm very glad to have you. And we'll have a full interview span to get to know your work and hear your thoughts on many different things. So to start, can you introduce yourself and share a bit more about your background with us?
Absolutely, yes, I'd be delighted to. Yeah, my name is David Rondel. I'm a philosophy professor at the
Mhm.
University of Nevada, which is in northern Nevada in Reno. Um, I'm 47 years old. I'm from Toronto, Canada, born and raised.
Oh, I
That's
didn't
my
know that actually.
hometown. Yeah, yeah. But I've been living in the United States for 12 years now. But yeah, Toronto is where I'm from. So a lot of my work philosophically for quite a long time has been sort of in areas of political philosophy. Um, the theory of equality or egalitarianism is one area where I devoted a lot of research attention over the years. I also have strong research interests in American philosophy, which is sort of the philosophy of pragmatism, a
Yeah.
uniquely US homegrown tradition in philosophy. But lately, last few years, I guess, after getting tenure is really when this change of
Congratulations.
direction. Thank you. When this happened, I've started increasingly being interested in the philosophy of emotion,
Mm.
moral psychology, and within those areas, sort of a particular interest in anxiety and also sort of some of the intersections and connections between anxiety and philosophy. So that's sort of a very brief sketch of my sort of trajectory.
Mm.
And yes, I mean, it's probably that later work on philosophy of emotion and anxiety that is most germane to our conversation here today. But of course, if you want to talk about political philosophy in some capacity, I'm happy to do that as well.
Sure. I mean, to be honest, I don't think we can completely separate them. But you
Mm,
were right. The focus of my work in this podcast and our conversation would probably, I mean, what led me to you was the book on anxiety. And I do, because there isn't a poverty of self-help books and psychology book out there. And I love your perspective, your philosophical perspective, plus your unique background
mm.
that would bring us a slightly different perspective. So if I ask what drew you to philosophy, that would probably pick up the whole interview. But maybe
Yeah.
how did you venture from philosophy into a book on anxiety? Is there a link that you can see somewhere that had led you there? Was it personal? Share as
I,
much as you feel comfortable.
yeah, oh, for sure. I think there was a link, definitely. So, I mean, I got into philosophy because I kind of wandered into a philosophy class as an undergraduate, and it really just hooked me right away. And then, fast forward to graduate degrees, and I just kept with it. One of the things that I mentioned in the preface of the new book is that though I didn't recognize it at the time, my being drawn to philosophy, I think, was sort of covertly, in part, motivated by a kind of philosophy acted as a kind of reprieve from anxiety that I've suffered with anxiety, honestly, as far back as my memory takes me. I
Mm,
mentioned in the book too that I sort of, as a pretty young boy, maybe at age 9 or 10, I
mm,
started suffering with panic attacks, which were sort of completely incomprehensible to me because I don't think I knew the language of what a
mm,
panic attack was. They were just these inexplicable feelings. But anyways, as a young sort of undergraduate, I didn't see it clearly at the time, but philosophy um, provided some kind of anti-anxiety therapy for me in some way. I could lose myself in deep philosophical questions. It offered a kind of temporary reprieve
yes.
from the pain of everyday anxiousness. And
Yeah.
in some ways, I mean, that's what I think in many ways drew me to philosophy. It offered a kind of calming balm for a lot of my anxious worry. It's also just intrinsically interesting, philosophical questions about life and death and meaning and knowledge and ethical responsibility. These are just inherently, I think, fascinating human questions. Um, but yes, I wrote this new book as, in a way, a kind of homage to that trajectory, sort of discovering philosophy as a way to treat or manage anxious feelings, and to sort of reflect on that trajectory. So yes, I do think without really knowing it clearly at the time, what really initially drew me into the study of philosophy and eventually a career as a philosophy professor was the way that it enabled me to sort of maybe manage and think about, but also get some space from
Mm,
anxious worry, which is
mm,
sort of an unpleasant uh,
mm.
presence in daily life. Yeah.
Wow. It's really interesting to hear what you said there because personally, I've also found quite a lot of psychological remedy in philosophy, especially after, well, I would never say I've exhausted the psychology realm because no, but yeah, felt like I reached a bottleneck and turned to philosophy and go, oh, another whole new world. What philosophy, such a what a big word. Were there a particular school, thinker, approach that you were drawn to at first?
That's a good question. So, I mean, I began studying philosophy at University of Western Ontario. That's in London, Ontario, Canada, near the border with Michigan. Um, and the department there, where I studied, was very sort of Western, we could say. So it saw philosophy as primarily a tradition that begins in ancient Greece and sort of uh, through the centuries into Europe and the United States and so on. I maybe got a little hint of Buddhist or Hindu thought,
Mm.
very minimal. So the tradition that I was schooled in was mostly that sort of what we would call a kind of Western philosophical tradition. I think what maybe among them, those that hooked me the hardest were some of the existentialist thinkers. Um, Jean-Paul Sartre and the novelist and playwright Albert Camus, the sort of among the French ones. Russian novelists like Dostoevsky,
Mm.
whose work is sort of rich with existentialist ideas. Martin Heidegger, maybe a little bit
Mm.
later as well. So those were, I think, some of the
Dense.
early philosophers that really hooked me. I mean, and actually, those are the ones that are really talking about anxiety explicitly.
Mm.
But even more generally, I really enjoyed the kind of philosophy as a discipline that really strives to achieve clarity, to sort of really map out arguments, to sort of test their validity. Clarity is a real virtue of philosophical reflection, and I think that just by itself had a kind of anti-anxiety helpfulness to it. I mean, when I know these things are a little bit different for different people, but
Mm.
when a mind is swirling with anxious worry, there's something very kind of grounding and helpful, I think, about that kind of careful, meticulous, methodical clarity that philosophy tries to achieve.
Mm.
I mean, maybe this can come up as our conversation unfolds, but I think,
Or we can
CBT or
turn the conversation that way.
yeah, yeah. Cognitive behavioral therapy, which I think is still probably the most commonly used
It is.
non-pharmaceutical treatment
Yes.
for anxiety disorder. It has many kind of folk philosophical elements in it. You're supposed to sort of question negative thinking. You're supposed to kind of put the lie to them. You can ask, sort of, well, what if that were to be the case? I mean, a lot of techniques of CBT are sort of, in many ways, mirror those virtues of sort of philosophical clarity. I'm not saying that CBT is a philosophical system by itself, but
CBT and Stoicism has a lot of link.
yes, I agree with that. Yeah,
Mm.
exactly. Yeah, you're sort of kind of achieving a self mastery or a self inward looking stance on your own sort of emotions. So, um, yeah, so those were the philosophers that like sort of maybe most hooked me for their depth and their existential gravitas. But I think the whole activity of philosophy, sort of rationally looking at arguments, contemplating far off, highly abstract things, I think all of it proved helpful for
Mm.
me
Mm.
in managing anxiety, which was when I was a young person, 18 years old. It was probably at its worst for me back then, if I'm thinking about it.
Mm.
A few decades ago now.
If
Yeah.
I were to force you to pick a favorite philosopher or
Who might it be? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think maybe the American pragmatist philosopher William
Ro-
James, who I
Ooh.
do have a chapter on in the book, might be my favorite. He writes so beautifully. He's the brother of the great novelist Henry James, so it's a very skilled, talented family there. But his writing is just so far-ranging, so deeply sort of human and compassionate. I never get tired of reading William James. So if I had to pick a favorite, he was also a really good guy. That helps. Some of these philosophers were pretty nasty people when you look back at them.
Mm.
Like the name Heidegger came up. Heidegger was a terrible Nazi in his life. But James was a really good guy, and that helps a little bit too. If I have to pick a favorite, if you'll force me to pick a favorite, yeah,
I
yeah.
hear you. Is Rorty a pragmatist philosopher?
Richard Rorty is a
Yeah.
pragmatist. Yeah, we would call him like a neo-pragmatist, like a newer
Ah,
pragmatist. So
I see.
the classical pragmatist philosophers, so Charles Sanders Peirce, William James, John Dewey,
Mm, mm,
these are figures that arise in the sort of later 19th century, after the American Civil War.
mm,
Richard Rorty is sort of much more recent. His breakthrough book, Philosophy in the Mirror of Nature, was published in 1979. So it's a later wave of pragmatist philosophy, but absolutely, Richard Rorty is in my certainly among the pragmatists in that tradition.
I
Yeah,
hear you.
yeah,
Slight change of direction. Well, you
sure.
wrote books. I mean, actually, you talked about somewhere, I might have forgotten, but the process of writing the book itself was therapeutic for you. I
Yeah.
think a lot of my audience are probably creative writers. Some of them intend to publish, some of them not. What aspects of the writing process do you think has been the most helpful to you personally? Was it the act of writing itself? Was it the
Hmm.
researching? Was it the virtual conversations you had with
Yeah.
or anything about
Yeah.
writing you can share with us?
Yeah. It's a really good question. I think I do find writing just by itself therapeutic. It's a form of escapism, um, which is maybe a unique thing to say among a lot of academics. Writing can be the source of anxiety because there's a sort of pressure to publish, and but in
I
general, I think, yeah. Sorry.
Sorry, no, I'm sorry, I shouldn't
Yeah.
interrupt. But I'm
No.
actually interested in that distinction you found between your academic writing and the process of writing this book, which seems to be more public facing.
It is a little more public facing. Yeah, it is still an academic book when push comes to shove. It's published with Oxford University Press, so it is
Mhm.
an academic press, not a trade press. But the hope was very much to write something that could be accessible to a wider reading audience, not just technical specialists. We're very few in number. So
Yes,
hopefully I've achieved that. It's not easy to write publicly when you've been trained all your life to write dry journal articles. But hopefully, I managed to pull that off.
I think you
But
have.
on the writing of the book, so this was written predominantly during COVID lockdowns,
Yeah.
which was a very sort of just anxious time, I think, for many
Was
people,
that
many of us.
planned? Was it inspired by COVID?
No, I don't think so. I was just kind of home with a lot of time. I mean, I was teaching online, which was a terrible
Mm,
experience, but
mm,
but I had a lot of time to write. And as I said, at that time, I had just received tenure, which provided me a kind of freedom to take on some new topics. I vaguely thought, and I think this proved to be true. I vaguely thought at the time that writing about anxiety and philosophy and sort of rediscovering some of these great philosophers who wrote about these subjects, like Soren Kierkegaard and Heidegger and Schopenhauer and the Stoics and William James. I thought that it would somehow have a therapeutic effect on my own anxiety, and I think that proved to be the case. Now, why? It's hard to say how that was so or what specifically uh, was helpful, but I do think that in general, so look, in general, many people have a tendency to kind of flee the feelings of anxiety, right? I mean, it's something we want to run away from and hide from and plug our ears and get away from. But there is a kind of value too in exposure, in sort of going towards the anxiety and sort of studying it and looking at it. I mean, the basic idea of this kind of exposure is that something becomes a little bit less daunting and formidable if it can be confronted in a certain way. And I guess that's what helped, day over day, sort of reading texts about anxiety, thinking about anxiety, trying to sort of match up philosophical insights that I was wrestling with, and sort of maybe matching them or seeing how well they apply to my own experience with anxiety. Over time, it had a kind of therapeutic effect. And I think maybe the best way I can explain it is just to say that it was a form of exposure.
Mm.
A scary thing can become less scary if it can be confronted, if it can be stared at in the
Yeah.
face somehow.
Yes.
So
Yes.
maybe that's how it worked. I don't know. But that was, I think, the vague hope I had when I was sort of embarking on the project. Maybe writing a book about anxiety would be helpful for my own anxiety and perhaps helpful for other people's anxiety. I'd be over the moon in pleased if it turned out to be the case that some readers were helped in some small way by the book as well. Although it
Mm.
wasn't intended as a kind of self-help or therapeutic book.
Mm.
But if it had that effect for some people, I'd be delighted, absolutely delighted. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
Wow, I am already pretty sure that I mean, I personally loved it.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much.
You explored different philosophical traditions or figures apart from the ones that really inspired you, the existentialist.
Mhm.
Um, was it, correct me if I said anything that butchered what you said, but can you tell us what they are? Because our audience have not yet read your book. And were there anything surprising when you covered these different schools and when you were doing your research? Feel free to go into the specifics because
Yeah,
I
sure.
hope my audience can benefit quite directly from hearing what you said too.
Absolutely. Well, here I can hold up the book. I don't know if everyone will see. There's a
Nice
copy of it.
cover.
Yeah, thank you. A danger which we do not know. That's a line from Freud,
And
but
I
we can talk
love
about it
that.
later.
I love
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Um, so there's 6 chapters in the book, and each one is dedicated to a specific philosopher or philosophical tradition, with an eye to sort of exploring what they might be able to teach us about the nature of anxiety, where it comes from, what it is. Is it an emotion? Is it a mood? Is it an affect? Is it a syndrome or a disorder? Um, and also maybe in some cases, I think most explicitly with the Stoics, to explore some of the therapeutic techniques that these philosophers have um, promulgated. So, a very brief tour, I guess, through the book. I mean, that's the kind of metaphor. It's a journey into anxiety. So, the journey begins in Denmark, 19th century Denmark, with Soren Kierkegaard, the great existentialist thinker, who talked a lot about anxiety as a he defined it as the dizziness of freedom. That's his first famous line from Kierkegaard. He thinks that anxiety is sort of written into the human exercise of freedom, where we have the ability to choose, we have the ability to go one way rather than another. The future is open and uncertain, and sort of that's the kind of predicament in which anxiety fundamentally lives. The go on chapter 2 is about William James, and I explore sort of some of James's views about the nature of emotion in that chapter, and also James has a sort of this beautiful description of what he calls the sick soul. Sick soul. I mean, some people are just prone
Mm.
constitutionally to unhappiness and to darkness and to fear. Some people are just a little bit more cheerful. But he doesn't want to kind of he wants to celebrate in a certain way the sick soul. The sick soul is a deep person. There's depth and meaning and philosophical wisdom to be found in the um, in the sort of sick soul, the sort of constitutionally unwell, unhappy, scared person. And I think that chimes. I think James's message there chimes maybe with a previous guest on your podcast, Mariana Alessandri, who was
Mm.
talking about the value of negative emotions.
Yeah.
We do sort of inhabit a culture, don't we, where negative emotions, melancholy, sadness. We want to sort of shoo them away in favor of
Exactly.
cheerfulness. But there's a lot, there's a lot of depth and meaning and truth. Freud himself said that the melancholic person has his words, a keener eye for the truth. And I think there's something very uh, deep and on point about what he says there. So that's chapter 2 on William James. Chapter 3 is called Anxiety Reveals the Nothing. And there I explore some of Martin Heidegger's ideas about anxiety and its relationship to fear of death, actually. So I think for Heidegger, as for other existentialist philosophers, at that sort of fundamental bottom of our anxiety, if you follow a path of fear far enough, it will
Mm.
sort of culminate in this fear of oblivion, fear of
Yeah.
death,
Mm.
and sort of the deep
Or
uncertainty
anxiety
about,
ties back to that. I think
yeah,
Ernest
yeah.
Becker said that, or someone.
Oh, yeah. And
Mm.
it's hard to dispute that that's not true, isn't it?
Actually, if you say that to most of general public who haven't been reading philosophy, they probably would. Ref I have had a lot of people disagreeing with that notion when I first mentioned it, um, because that's not how they consciously experience themselves.
Right, right. Yeah, and
Mm.
it's a good point. If I feel a stab of panic randomly for no reason, is that about death? That seems like a conceptual leap. Or if I'm, ruminating at night about whether I was rude to a colleague at some function,
Exactly,
is that about
exactly.
death? Yeah.
Because
I think
people are
Heidegger
very
would say that,
attached to their object of the. I mean, we can probably talk about the distinction between fear and anxiety, but the
sure, yeah,
yeah, especially when it's not the kind of diffuse kind of anxiety for the particular thing they fear. Sometimes it's hard to link that to yeah, death. But the way
yeah,
I bridge it is to say, well, you're afraid of the death of something, of
right,
losing something, whether it be something conceptual, even just someone's love, warmth, reputation, yeah, something, an experience. Mm.
absolutely right. Yeah, yeah. I think surely when we have anxiety about a particular object, let's say, you're replaying a conversation, was I rude to a colleague or something like that?
Mm.
There's something deeper perhaps that the
Mm.
anxiety is really about, maybe being rejected or being humiliated in the future or having people think less of you. So it's
Mm.
very often the case that there's sort of an immediate object to so something immediate and apparent that the
Mm.
anxiety is about. But I think there surely is something oftentimes behind it, deeper, more significant. But I think, you know much better than me in sort of therapeutic context that it can be hard for people to sometimes make those connections.
Mm.
But that point is well taken. Yeah.
Now I'm interested in something you said earlier that Freud said those with anxiety has a keener eye on truth, reality. What's the
Yeah,
don't
he
want to
said
be
that about he said
skewing
that about
Freud.
people with melancholy.
Melancholy.
But I think you can extend the point more broadly, right?
See,
Suffering brings wisdom, maybe we can say.
well, I have a challenging question.
Yeah.
And if you just don't want to answer it, that's fine. If you were to map it to our current discourse, vocabularies we use, who are these people? Are they people in mental institutions? Are they the depressed? Are you saying that people in a therapist's office are more, I mean, you know what I mean? Like who would they be?
Who would the sick souls be, do you mean? Or
Yeah, probably,
yeah, the
yeah.
sick souls. Yeah, so that's right. I think they're people of all persuasions. I'm inclined to think that there's a little bit of sick soul in everyone. These aren't
Mm.
pure types. Sick soul over here, cleanly delineated, happy, cheerful people over here. Everything's on a continuum.
But
But I think
categories
they're
can
all.
be so useful, Dr. Rondo.
Oh, sure, sure. I'm not. Don't want to throw the categories away. Just to maybe insist on their blurry boundaries.
Yeah, no, I'm actually
Yeah,
agreeing with you, and
yeah,
but then acknowledging that in our daily conversations, having these categories and boxes
sure.
can facilitate communications and understanding, but they have huge limitations for sure.
Sure, no disagreement there. Yeah, but who are the
Mm,
six souls? I mean, you and me, uh, artists and creators and writers and journalists, and I mean, people from all walks of life. I think
mm,
people who, yeah, fall into right little moods of darkness and despair and fear, and people who feel loss a little more keenly than maybe average. So I don't think it's a special class of people, like this like small cohort of poets or something only. I think the six souls are all around us.
yeah.
And moreover, there's probably a little bit of that in everyone,
Mm.
if we're being honest and reflective, because we're humans and we are all cut from the same cloth at the end of the day,
Do you think suffering brings that out?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's actually the next chapter is about Arthur Schopenhauer, the German
Mm.
philosopher, who's actually one of the very few people in his time and place in sort of mid 19th century Europe who knew anything about um, Indian philosophy, Hindu and Buddhist philosophy. I think that's a deep Buddhist insight that suffering brings wisdom. Suffering certainly can lead to what the Buddhists call karuna, compassion.
Yeah.
It need not. I mean, I think people can respond to suffering in different kinds of ways. It's not an automatic
Mm.
thing. But I think I felt that. If I'm being
Mm.
honest and reflective about my own battles with mental health and with anxiety, I think it's made me a softer person, a little bit more compassionate, less
Mhm.
quick to rush to judgment on people, maybe more forgiving of like weird and quirky and odd behavior that otherwise might have been offending to me or something like that. I think so, and I don't think I'm alone in that.
Mm.
That's a very, I think, old insight, and I think the Buddhists talk about it beautifully. The Buddhist theorists and writings. There's an essential link, I think, between suffering, broadly construed, anxious suffering or otherwise, and enlarged compassion, which is
Mm.
one of the central sort of Buddhist virtues in right living and ethical conduct. So
Mm.
I do think there's a connection there. How that works exactly is very mysterious to me. I'm not sure. Maybe it's a kind of maybe there's an ability to reverse perspectives where we suffer and then we think, well, maybe they're
I
suffering
think
as I suffered, and I don't know how that works.
you mean the how it leads to karuna or just wise?
Yeah, how it exactly
Mm.
how does suffering make us more compassionate when it does?
The Buddhist holds that basically being alive is suffering. So
That's right.
acknowledging that and get that. And
I am a cat dad. Yeah, I have a furry friend here. Yeah,
yeah, and our own suffering connects us to the tissue of humanity in the sense that it's basically just coming closer to reality. Exactly a bit like what Freud said.
yeah,
And also just like what you said is through going through it yourself, you understand it when you see it in others.
that's right. Yeah.
Mm.
Um, no, and I think that's true. I think there's a lot of truth in that. It doesn't mean that it happens every time. If a person suffers, it's not a guarantee that will culminate in a more compassionate
Mm.
perspective, but it does happen frequently enough, doesn't it? That there's
You're
they
right.
the
It could
Bud
go both way. It could
yeah,
actually, yeah.
it could make someone meaner and
Mm.
harsher maybe,
Mm.
but
Because they are wounded themselves and they had no no choice, like
yeah.
quote, but that's a separate conversation.
Yes, right. A good one, but yes, right.
Yeah. Well, going back to a bit of a philosophical definition, you highlighted both in your book and in our conversation that anxiety is different to just fear. I don't think most people differentiate them. It's a bit like jealousy and envy was a
Yeah,
distinction. Anxiety and fear, I think what I've read and understood is that anxiety or one of them, it's more diffused, like kind of just this general sense, whereas the other one has a specific target. But
yeah.
I think you wrote something about it being evaluative and interpretive. Can you say a bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah. So you're absolutely right that that's a kind of common way to differentiate between fear and anxiety is to say that fear has a specific, what philosophers would call intentional object. It's about something identifiable. So there's a
Mm,
tiger bearing down on you. I have fear, and it's clear why. Anxiety, um, and I think this goes back to Kierkegaard, but Freud had the same idea. Anxiety is kind of fear or sort of an emotion or an affective state that's close by to fear, but without an obvious intentional object. Sometimes it's not clear. So I feel scared in a certain kind of way, but there's no intentional object to which the fear necessarily corresponds. So this is, Freud's line, a danger which we do not know. So, realistic anxiety, which is basically fear for Freud, is danger in regard to an object that we do know, whereas anxiety, or what he calls neurotic anxiety, is a danger uh, in regard to an object which we do not know. Um, so that's a very sort of, I think, commonly assumed difference. I don't know that it explains everything. Sometimes, as we've already mentioned, it is clear what the sort of anxiety is about. I have anxiety about a speech I have to give tomorrow, or a big test that I'm taking, or maybe I'm worried that I screwed up at work or something like that. Sometimes it does have an object. So I don't know if that sort of Kierkegaardian Freudian um, distinction is sort of perfect, but I do think that's there is a kind of anxious emotional state
mm,
where it's just it maybe this most closely corresponds to GAD, or generalized
mm,
anxiety disorder, in this sort of from the
mm,
disorder standpoint of things, where a person feels jumpy, unsettled, very uncomfortable, unpleasant, but there's no clear object that maps up with these feelings. Um, some days you just kind of wake up and you're jumpy and anxious, but there's no reason for it. There's not anything specific that the anxiety is about, at least not identifiably so. But yes, you mentioned, and I do argue for this in the book, that anxiety is sort of it sort of has an inherent evaluative and interpretive dimension. So I think, look, there's more to human anxiety than just, as I put it there, blood pumping fear.
mm,
In order to be anxious, I think we have to have a certain kind of, well, okay, let me put it this way. There's nothing inherently frightening about a little bit of tightness in the chest. That's a physical symptom of anxiety. There's nothing intrinsically frightening about it. Um, it can become very frightening if an anxious mind thinks, oh my God, I'm about to have a heart attack. But that's an interpretive decision already, right? There's this sort of raw, brute feeling, physical
mm,
manifestation of anxiety, and we're interpreting it, we're categorizing it, we're sort of investigating it and letting certain thoughts have salience about it. I mean, you can imagine a person who feels some physical symptoms of anxiety, like some tightness in the chest, takes a deep breath, understands that this is a very sort of common physical manifestation of anxious feelings, breathes, gathers themselves, and sort of moves on from them. So I guess in order for anxiety to really strike, it's not just that certain feelings have to register, but rather certain feelings have to register and they have to be accepted and interpreted and evaluated in a certain way. They have to strike as dangerous, as
mm,
something meriting worry,
mm,
something serious. So maybe another way to put the point is to say that there can't be anxiety without that. So there's the physical there's brute anxiety, we might say, the physical evolutionary feelings that we feel.
mm,
But in order for anxiety to really get its hold on us, that those feelings have to sort of make their way through a kind of interpretive or evaluative filter,
mm,
which is going to be connected to who we are and what we care about and our personal history and maybe our childhood in various ways. But yes, I mean, there's more to anxiety than just fear, blood
mm,
pumping fear. There's a kind of evaluative, as I put it, an interpretive element built in, which I think raises interesting questions about whether non-human animals can really be anxious or whether they can just be afraid. For sure, they can be afraid. I think that's clear.
Mm,
But if they
mm.
can't, if they're not capable of that evaluative, interpretive dimension, maybe they can't quite be anxious like us. But that's philosophical speculation, maybe for another time and place. Yeah.
Funny, and my next question was going to be, I think a lot of people who listens to this, or maybe I'm assuming, but many people already assume that they overthink and over-intellectualize, and they have anxiety. So someone might say, "Oh, maybe just I should just stop thinking."
Yeah.
So how do we balance? Because existential anxiety and the fear of death is such a salient subject. Mm, how can we balance engaging with these important questions without spiraling deeper into our own neuroses?
Yeah. No, that's such a such a good question. Um, I think as maybe a psychiatric professional, you're probably in a better position to answer than
Mm.
me. I mean, take the fear of death. That's, I think, a really good place to begin. There are philosophers who recommend, so Martin Heidegger, who I mentioned, long before him, Montaigne, Michel de Montaigne, they, even the Stoics to a particular, in some ways, they recommend that one way to kind of combat the fear of death is to think about death all the time. Have it in your mind constantly. And
Negative
again,
visualization.
that's right. Yeah. Go towards it, right? If thinking about our death is like the intellectual equivalent of staring at the sun, as one theorist once put it, uh, keep trying to stare and your eyes will get used to it or something. So death anxiety will be calmed by going towards thoughts of death. Other philosophers, so most famously, I think the great Jewish modern philosopher Baruch Spinoza, thought that we should think, don't ever think of death. If death thoughts make you frightened and jumpy, forget about it. Go do something valuable. Go read a book and or go for a nice walk in nature or have a glass of wine with your friends or something like that. Why would you dwell on something that's sort of unhelpful? So I don't know. I think there's some wisdom in both of those approaches. Complete avoidance of difficult thoughts and that seems excessive, but so does like constantly thinking about something frightening and like that. And that doesn't sound like a very fun way to live to me, frankly. So you're absolutely right, Amy. I mean, I'm sure the right answer is to be found somewhere in the middle there. Now, where is the middle and how do we locate it? And is the middle maybe different for different people? Surely these are difficult questions, and I wonder if maybe they need to be worked out sort of on a case by case, individual by individual basis um, for each person. But yes, there's a deep tension there. There can
Mm.
be too much and there can be too little, and then there can be maybe just right in the
How do
middle.
you
But
find your balance?
um, so I think it really depends on maybe what we're talking about. So I mentioned in the book that I think I'm probably more frightened of death than the average person. I do when I do think about it, it does cause me quite a bit of sort of terror and fear. I like the Spinoza angle. The Heidegger's advice to think about it even more. Frankly, as someone who already thinks about death quite a bit, that doesn't sound very attractive to me. So I try to think about it less. That's death. If it comes to like sort of difficult political realities that are going on, I try to maybe go towards that a little bit more. So it might be topic dependent for me. And I don't know that I found a balance necessarily, but yeah, I'd be hesitant to say that there's like a formula that you can, or like an algorithm that you can just kind of
Mm,
apply, and there's
mm,
the balance. I mean,
mm,
we're complicated creatures, and we're dealing with the world in various ways. There's different things that are frightening. And sort of differently specific things. So I agree that the balance is the right thing to try to achieve, but I don't know if there's any general advice I have for trying to achieve the balance. I think we know when thinking can become sort of obsessive and um, unmanageable and sort of too much. I think we probably have a conception of what it would mean to sort of engage too little. Um, I mean, are there people out there who just never, ever think about difficult things, weightier things? I don't know. I'm not in their brains. I'd find it hard to believe that there are people who never engage with such questions. So, yeah, gosh, finding the right amount, finding the mean in the middle, what Aristotle would call the golden mean, is a tricky business. But I think I agree with you that that's the challenge. That's the goal to be achieved, however it is
Mm,
to be achieved. Yeah.
mm.
I mean, do you have some thoughts sort of from a more sort of psychiatric perspective that are
Oh,
helpful?
about dwelling and non-dwelling.
Yeah.
Personally, I have always go to the extreme. I like to imagine the worst. And
Mm,
I have personally benefited very little from CBT
hmm.
because, first of all, my ego hates it when someone tells me I'm irrational.
Yep.
Um, and just telling me that I'm catastrophizing doesn't actually help. I might
Mhm.
be, but I am doing it. And my therapist used to say, Imi, you're really bad at math, aren't you? Which I am. And you're really bad at probability calculation.
Uh-huh.
Probably. Because to me, 0.001% chance of something happening is as scary as
Yeah.
1% or 10%. I mean, it will happen.
Right.
So I haven't found that kind of rational approach very reassuring, but I like going to the worst and then imagining how I would deal with it or how to come to terms with the worst. But I appreciate that many people are not like that, and I don't get a lot of that from general advice. Usually people
Yeah.
just ask me to don't stop thinking too much or that your fear is not your reality. I especially get that from people who study a little bit of counseling.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, although I do say that to people sometimes, that fear is just fear, it's not pointing to reality. Sorry, I don't think I'm answering your question
No,
directly.
no,
What was
I
the
mean,
question again?
well, about sort of finding this golden mean between sort of
Yeah,
obsessive
dwelling.
and yeah, and dwelling, non-dwelling. Yeah.
Okay,
You know,
so being
you're
non-obsessive is something that I very recently learned from working with a new supervisor who would just say to me, and you got to stop and just distract yourself, go into your body.
Mhm.
And in the past, I hate it when someone asks me to go to my body because I don't know what my body's doing, but my brain is
Right.
active. Um, so it is a new lesson for me to actually there is an option to stop obsessing. I
Yeah.
usually my older approach was to obsess it to the point where I get bored or I
Yeah.
just can't do it anymore. But I appreciate this is just so highly personal. I wouldn't go and advise a client to do the same thing as I do. Like just keep
Yeah.
obsessing over it until
Right.
I don't think
I
that's
mean,
very helpful for many.
it's very interesting that you mentioned that CBT has not been helpful for you. I mean, I think that's basically the same for me. Um, what's been much more helpful in my particular case is actually ACT, so
Oh
acceptance
yeah, I
commitment
love that.
therapy,
Mm.
which is actually was founded by Stephen Hayes, who's my a colleague here at the University of Nevada in psychology. I'm in philosophy.
No,
Uh,
you know, I interviewed him.
oh, did you? Okay, so yeah,
Yeah.
he's yeah just recently retired now, professor
Oh, did he?
at the University of Nevada as well. Yeah. And so that has that has I think much more that has more Buddhist elements written into it, if not explicitly so. It's there. You're not trying to obsess. You're not trying to rationalize anything. You're just sort of watching as if from a third person point of view. You're kind of watching your thoughts. I love this exercise he has about sort of leaves on a river. You're imagining a sort of gentle brook flowing down. There's leaves floating on the river, and you have a thought, and you take the thought and you sort of, you know, put it on the leaf, and you kind of, oh, there it goes. You just watch it. So, and that, I mean, that I find that kind of meditative acceptance stance much more helpful as well than rationally scrutinizing anxious fears. Well, what percentage chance is this going to happen? And poring over the data. That's never really helped me either. So maybe we're maybe we're alike in that regard. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, it's lovely to know that you were close to Dr. Hayes, geographically at least.
Oh yes, we're same town here. Yeah. Yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah, he's wonderful.
Yes, and that is the approach that blends the Western rooted Greek origin rationality with a more Buddhist kind of accepting, well, nowadays everyone talks about mindfulness
Yeah.
approach.
Yeah.
Indeed. And that I think that is the what makes it so powerful is that the acceptance part of it remedies the overly rational, brain-driven side of it, and then you get the best of both.
That's right. Yeah,
Mm,
I agree. Yeah.
yeah. Do you think there's a certain kind of anxiety that's collective and unique to our time, such as eco-anxiety is one thing we can talk about,
Yeah.
um, or just social media, AI, of course, technology, COVID, if it still feels relevant, probably does. Mm,
Yeah. I'm sure there are unique forms of anxiety. I mean, maybe it's right to say sort of at the outset though that every age um, has anxiety, every epoch. I mean, we are worried about a lot of things, and like you say, there's AI, and there's the COVID, and there's increasingly unstable political realities. Uh, but it's still nothing compared to sort of what a typical, let's say, medieval European would have lived through. I mean, lifespan, many decades shorter on average, lots of
it's
disease and violence. I mean, life was harder back then in a lot of ways.
it's interesting that you say that because I think people always think they live in the hardest time.
Yeah, yeah.
Just like the whole generation XYZ argument.
That's right. That's right. So,
Mm,
yeah, I mean, there's different periods, different epochs, and different social conditions probably bring about different forms of anxiety. I mean, you mentioned eco-anxiety. From what I can tell, and I've sort of read a few things about this, I mean, this is one of the most pervasive forms of anxiety for young people, rightly so. It makes good sense.
I'm surprised actually.
Yeah, the eco-anxiety is a huge phenomenon. I
Mm,
think, it's environmental collapse is kind of like a prime uh, object for anxiety, isn't it? Because it's creeping. It's sort of like a dark cloud that's sort of ever present. And it's not like, if I have to give a speech, I have anxiety about it, but then the speech happens and maybe I do well or I don't do well or I fumble my words or I don't, but it's over. And then you can kind of go. With eco-anxiety, it's never quite over. I mean, weather gets more severe. We're told that there's water levels are rising. It's getting hotter, et cetera, et cetera. There's worse fires and mudslides and so, but there's not really like a point at which an event occurs and then it's over. It's kind of this just looming threat, ever worsening. And in that way, in that respect, it's kind of almost tailor-made to have specific anxiety about it.
mm,
So I'm not surprised, especially for young people who are going to sort of live
mm,
longer and face it uh, sort of more overtly. Yeah, I know you mentioned AI and sort of social media. I'm sure these things are sort of contributors in their unique way to our particular anxious moment. How that works, I'm not quite sure. Um, but yes, I guess I would say, I mean, it does feel like anxiety is, in particular, is just off the charts these days. I can observe sort of just with my students
mm,
who are just typical American college students. They are seemingly just racked with anxiety in a way
mm.
maybe they weren't even 10 years ago. This is very anecdotal, you know.
No, I think talking about your personal observation is probably more useful. Bring it home.
Yeah. So, what brings that about? I mean, it could be a lot of things. I mean, so the philosopher Charlie Kurth, you might want to invite him on your program, has written a wonderful book a few years ago called The Anxious Mind. It's a very technical.
Charlie, how do you spell Kurt?
Kurth is
Ah,
Kurth. Um, and he says that at the
Mm.
root of anxiety is what he calls problematic uncertainty. That's what anxiety is a response to. Um,
Big uncertainty.
and yeah,
The
I
Buddha
think
would
there's
say
a
everything is uncertain,
well, that's right, that's right. But not all uncertainty is
problematic.
problematic.
So what
It,
defines problematic uncertainty?
well, yeah, I think that's a difficult sort of artful question, but things that might harm us, ways
Hmm.
in which we might suffer. So I think it, there's a lot of anxiety about sort of future um, economic arrangements. I mean, what if you're 20 years old today, you're probably wondering like what kinds of jobs will there be? It seems like we're in a rapidly changing sort of economic world. What's possible? Yeah, eco anxiety, anxiety about finding a partner or having a family. I mean, I think these are these are kinds of uncertainties that maybe strike a lot of people as problematic. Sort of, we're talking about sort of broad cultural things, even day to day. I mean, the world feels dangerous in a lot of ways. There's a lot of problematic uncertainty. I think Kurth is exactly right. That's that's anxiety is a response to problematic uncertainty. And there's a lot of it today. Was there more of it? Is there more of it today than there used to be? Maybe with AI and social media, maybe that amplifies how much problematic uncertainty we think there is or feel as though there is. If you're a medieval British blacksmith, there's life is hard and it's going to be nasty, brutish, and short, and you won't live very long, and there's violence and disease. But maybe there's less sort of broadly speaking cultural problematic uncertainty. Maybe life's a little simpler, even though harder for the medieval British blacksmith. So
Mm.
it's a really good question. I don't know quite how to answer it.
Okay.
But just to say, it does feel as though this period of time is sort of overflowing with anxiety,
Mm.
maybe especially among young people, which is certainly what I
Mm.
observe in my
Mm.
classrooms and on campus um,
Yeah.
on a daily basis.
Mm.
Yeah.
And on the more, on the topic of more recent development, what are your thoughts on people using ChatGPT or AI? I've been asking most of my guests this question recently for
Yeah.
self-counseling because they are using it to replace, well, friends, boyfriends, and therapists and girlfriends and
Yeah. I have
partners.
no, yeah, I have a very limited experience with sort of counseling and therapy in general. I've seen two therapists in my life, and both were sort of very different, and both were very helpful to me. I know that when I talk to people, I often hear that most therapy doesn't work. Like most of it is bad for them.
All right.
Yeah, interestingly.
Shame on the profession.
Right, right. So I don't know. Something feels a little off about talking to ChatGPT in this way. Although maybe the first thing I'd say is if something can help you feel better and you're not harming yourself, I don't. Who am I to advise against it? I will say this. I think that there is a kind of how can I say a kind of a hyper capitalist, let's say, understanding of how therapy is supposed to work. So here in Reno, Nevada, which is a decently sized city of about 500,000 people, I think there's one or two sort of old school psychoanalysts that you can find. Everybody's doing CBT,
That's
ACT.
one thing I really appreciate about Europe, although it's still already going in that direction. It's slower,
Yeah.
but it's the same in Asia and Australia. Sorry for interrupting, but
No,
it
not at
is a
all. Not
trend
at
that
all.
I personally feel rather frustrated with. And what I like about England is that they still have a strong, well, it's a battle, not in the public health system where they need to get funding and for insurance
Yeah.
companies and all that. But there you
Right.
can still find a group of people passionate about it and doing courses about it, and you can still get training in it at least. Whereas it's almost non-existent in other parts of the world that I've lived in,
Right.
which is
And
so sad.
you ask yourself, well, why would that be? Well, I think there's a kind of profit capitalist explanation.
Completely.
Psychoanalysis takes time. It's slow. Its results are amorphous.
You get
It's a
worse
path.
before you get better.
Absolutely. So we almost think about mental health crises as kind of like, uh-oh, you won't be able to work very efficiently. So here, do a little bit of CBT, practice this sort of slow breathing, and get back into the office kind of thing. So
Mm.
therapy's been very sort of shortened. The way that insurance companies cover it is sort of in this very much in this efficiency model, in this capitalist sort of way of thinking. So I think maybe I see Chat GPT and AI type therapy as kind of that view on steroids. Like, let's go even further. So look, on the one hand, if something genuinely helps people feel better, people who are in despair and who are in crisis or in need of help, and it provides some kind of help, I suppose I sort of would say, okay, maybe reluctantly, but I sympathize with that and I accept that. But as a broader kind of critique of certain trends and how we're thinking about mental health, how we're treating it, how we're investing in it as a society, I think it does maybe rub me the wrong way. It would be better to talk to real people who have real
Mm.
human feelings and can, um, and that's very effective. Talk therapy is very effective. We have the data on that. I mean, nothing's perfect, but it works. So
Um, that was actually my one of the next questions, which is we live in a world that loves quick fixes to most things, physical pain and mental pain. So how would you sell, if you were to, a philosophical approach to anxiety, which I assume requires deeper reflections?
yeah.
Or does it has its place even? I suppose it does, otherwise you would have written a whole book on it.
Yeah, I think it has its place, and I think more and more people are coming to appreciate that this way of thinking about anxiety and mental health in general has something to offer. There are new sort of philosophical counselors popping up.
Oh yeah,
There's even
yeah,
there's even an association for philosophical counseling
there
that's
is.
accrediting people. Uh, I think it pays us to remember a couple of things. Number one. Philosophy is the oldest human academic discipline of them all. I mean, it began presumably when people started just asking deep questions about what is there and who am I and what can I know for sure. And, it's a deeply human, I tell my students this all the time, it's a deeply human activity, philosophy. I was raised and educated in this Western trajectory that goes from Socrates, well, pre-Socrates onwards into European thinkers and so on. But philosophy is a truly global phenomenon. Every people, every society, every on every continent on Earth, people are doing philosophy and always have been. Philosophy is deeply human, probably a lot like religion, frankly. And if you look at some of these old traditions, certainly in ancient Greece, but also in ancient China and India, philosophy was explicitly designed with therapeutic aims in mind. Philosophy's always been concerned with helping us lead more meaningful lives, more thoughtful lives, lives that have more virtue and ethical excellence in them. And again, that's not unique to one part of the world or one kind of society or tradition. This is a deeply human thing. So in a way, I don't think I'd want to sell anybody on anything new. If anything, I would be encouraging us to go back to the way that ancient peoples in Africa and Asia and indigenous North Americans have always been thinking about these things. We're finite creatures, we're mortal creatures. We know our time is limited. We're very clever. We enjoy beauty. We are susceptible to all kinds of pain and suffering. Philosophy is a beautiful human institution, ancient in origins, that can help us deal with and process some of these things. And I don't know if that's a good sales pitch, but um,
Recommend
there,
one book for people to start.
one book that's not my book. Yeah.
Of
Yeah.
course you could. Okay, your book plus that. No cheating.
About philosophy, yeah. A co-editor of mine, his name is Samir Chopra.
Okay.
We edited a book called The Moral Psychology of Anxiety together. He's a philosopher, although now
Um,
he's into philosophical counseling. You might want to invite him onto your program as
okay,
well.
okay, okay. New name. What's his name
Yeah.
again?
Samir Chopra, Chopra.
Yeah,
Samir.
sure.
Yeah.
Similar.
And he wrote a book called Anxiety, A Philosophical Guide. And it's
Ah,
actually, it's very,
very
his book and my
appealing.
book are quite similar, I think. We cover a lot of similar territory. They're different, of course, too. But in addition to maybe my book, I would recommend my co-editor Samir Chopra's book,
Mm,
which is
noted.
which is which is very good. Yeah, and it sort of highlights the deeply philosophical nature of anxiety. Absolutely.
Okay. I was actually thinking something more like an ancient classic. I thought you were going to say something
Oh,
like The Republic or
oh, well, of
Being in
course. Okay.
Time. But no, 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 no,
Yes.
no. Of course, we welcome your modern recommendation too. I just
Ye-
put it on my bookshelf and it's got a lovely cover.
Well,
It's
well,
like
sure.
anxiety, anxiety, anxiety surrounding a
Yeah.
square. What
Yes,
a
right.
claustrophobic, anxiety-provoking cover. Well done.
Well, if we're thinking more broadly, then of course I would recommend as well. So I was thinking about a new topical book, a
Yeah,
hot new
no,
book, but obviously all of the philosophical classics. Yes, Plato's Republic, work by the Stoics, the Epicureans. There's, I think, one of the most beautiful works on anxiety, or a lot of it comes from Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh,
mm,
writes beautifully about anxiety from a Zen
very, very
Buddhist,
easy to read.
easy to read, yeah, but so rich and
He's got quick fixes to everything because thanks to the marketing teams and the
yeah,
publishers, how to
yes,
sleep, how to eat, how to laugh.
that's true. Yeah, 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 that's the marketing. You're right.
But no, I
Uh,
agree with you. I think I am not being sarcastic actually. I do think they did such a good job in bridging deep wisdoms with something that is really digestible.
exactly,
Mm,
exactly. Yeah, yeah. Um, but yes, no, so much, and of course the existentialist philosophy. I mean, those are the writers that hooked me in the beginning. I don't know how therapeutically valuable it is, but it does
it is to
highlight, I think.
me.
Is it to you, like to read like Camus or
Oh, Camus. Oh, okay. Sorry.
Sartre?
I was still thinking about Thich Nhat Hanh.
Oh, he's very therapeutic to me.
I
Yeah.
used to go to his Buddhist community. It's called
Oh,
Wake Up Community, and it's all
mm,
around the world. So yeah, I am reasonably familiar with his work. But to the existential
okay.
stuff, well, I think they make me feel less lonely, but they often do require a bit of interpretation to not misinterpret
Yeah.
them. I actually find Nietzsche, correct me if I'm pronouncing him
Yep.
wrongly,
Yep. Yep.
more direct to read than say Camus, because you just read about someone, being a
Yeah.
stranger in a strange land or pushing a rock
Yeah.
up and then it rolls down again. And so your brain has to interpret it.
That's right. That's right.
Um,
Yeah.
but I do think everyone is different and speaks to
You know,
different people. Mm,
yeah, I think you said that reading the existentialists make you feel less alone. I mean, that's a very powerful thought. I mean, when you read sort of descriptions of anxiety from, the Epicurean philosophers or the Stoics from thousands of years ago, and they resonate as though they could be written today, that does afford a kind of sense of long range solidarity, doesn't it? We're all humans, we're all cut from the same cloth. People were panicking and frightened, in Athens 2,200 years ago, the same way that we are today in many respects. So there's a value there, I think, in not feeling alone. There's a kind of odd and vague sense of solidarity that we can find in reading these
could be
old
all that someone
works.
needs.
It could be, yeah, to feel less alone and to feel that these are normal human feelings and that they might pass.
This
Right.
could be a diversion, but I think this is partly why people are drawn to categories and diagnosis. Some people really want to be labeled as sick or have, well, not labeled as sick, but they seek a diagnosis because it really gives them some explanations. to what they have been
Yeah.
experiencing, and makes them don't not feel like they're completely alone in the world.
Yep. Yep. And if you go back to Charlie Kurth's idea that anxiety is really about problematic uncertainty,
Mhm.
sometimes the uncertainty is not knowing what it is, but if you put a label on it and you give it a
Mm.
category and it has a name, maybe that alleviates some of the uncertainty. Okay, well now I can deal with it. I have this diagnosis and now I can read up on it and I can find other people with that diagnosis and I can embark on a some of the uncertainty might be alleviated by the categorization. So I think you're right
Interesting.
there. Yeah, absolutely.
I just
Yeah.
know that I am very bad with uncertainty.
Yeah.
And, I've written about it, not a book, but probably because I was seeking my own answer.
Yeah.
Mm.
And yet, it's at the core of human existence that we need to learn to live with uncertainty. And that's a fact of life. There is uncertainty. We can't, it's impossible to imagine a state of affairs with no uncertainty.
Mm.
And so we do need to find ways to cope with uncertainty.
Mm.
Um, because, yeah, a
Mm.
life without uncertainty, I can't imagine such a thing. Uncertainty about health, about external things in the world, about the economy and the climate and what other people are thinking. And life is filled with uncertainty. And so we do need to find ways to deal with it intelligently in a healthy manner. Um, I think the hope to get beyond uncertainty is not a viable hope. That's not the kind of creatures we are, unfortunately.
Yeah,
Or well,
yeah.
or fortunately, for better or for worse, that's just how we are. So yeah, I agree
Mm.
with that.
I want to be respectful of your time, and I am growing anxious about taking too much of your time. But I still have
Please
a few
do.
questions, so I might just shoot them.
Sure, please
Um,
do.
Let
Yeah.
me think. Ah, do you think we can have a healthy relationship to anxiety? Can we make it a healthy thing, a part of our life? Or is it always a negative thing that we should get rid of or try to get rid of? Or if so, how? Or as much
Yeah.
as you can try and answer that.
Yeah. So I think it's useful to distinguish between anxiety, which understood as a normal human emotion,
Mhm.
versus anxiety maybe understood as something pathological or disordered. Everybody feels anxiety. And anxiety, I think, has a lot of benefits. We evolved, we human beings evolved to feel anxious for very good reason. I mean, when we're anxious in the right way, and not to such a degree so that it's debilitating or something. I mean, anxiety makes us more careful. We pay closer attention. We double check our calculations when we have anxiety. We take proper care. So, anxiety can be helpful to us in the right degree, in the right sort of in response to the right things, assuming it's not overblown. So I do want to distinguish that. I mean, I do mention an example in the book. I mean, imagine you're about to sort of go in for a complicated surgery. I mean, wouldn't you want the surgeon to have some level of anxiety, not to be in full-blown panic, but to look at the test results carefully, to prepare to. I mean, imagine that your surgeon is like cavalier, no anxiety at all, chilling, relaxed. That's not the kind of surgeon you want, or the kind of pilot you want flying your plane. You want someone with some anxiety there. So I wouldn't want to wish that away. But there's certainly a difference between that kind of normal, functionally beneficial, adaptive anxiety that we feel as a regular human emotion versus it can go wrong sometimes. I mean, if you can't leave the house because it's overwhelming and you're frightened, if you can't ride in an elevator, or I mean, anxiety and phobic behaviors can spiral. Or if you have a social anxiety that's so severe that you can't attend a pleasant party with friends or colleagues or something like that. I mean, they're very clearly there. It's become problematic. So yeah, I wouldn't want to wish away. I think human beings would be in deep trouble if we had no anxiety. Anxiety when it's properly placed and not too severe, it helps keep us safe. That's why it evolved in us, I think. It's a very valuable emotional, affective response.
Mm.
How to deal with sort of really bad anxiety where it's sort of interfering with your life and it's debilitating. Um, well, I think, you know, in that area, they they should come talk to you, I think, and read philosophy and go for walks in nature and talk to people. And I mean, maybe in some cases, I don't have much experience about this, but maybe in some cases, medications are appropriate as well. I mean, so
Mm.
I don't know that there's a one size fits all sort of silver bullet approach to anxiety of the unhealthy, debilitating sort. But what's helped me over the years is kind of a toolbox of different things that I know,
Mhm.
not with sort of perfect precision, but that have a general tendency to sort of help. Um, Anything that can help sleep is very good. Time in nature, don't drink too much. Like there's various like sort of little tips and rules, a little toolbox of strategies that are helpful. But again, we're humans. We're vulnerable. We're dealing with uncertainty. Some anxiety is probably unavoidable.
Mm.
Certainly of the healthy, normal variety. I mean, we need it. It's what keeps us safe.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
don't know if that's an answer to your question, but
No,
just some.
absolutely, absolutely. And I think not panicking about being anxious is probably a good start.
Right. Right.
I sometimes
Yeah,
think of them as a discomfort that I could live with and have. It's going back to our earlier inquiry about how do we strike a balance between not trying to push something away, but also not obsessing over them. Uh,
that's right. That's right.
yeah, what was I thinking?
Um,
Sometimes I liken it to like an ugly piece of furniture.
oh,
So like something that is you don't like it and just sits there, but can you just let it sit there? It doesn't have to hamper your life completely.
yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, at its worst, anxiety is very painful, isn't it? And there are occasions where people are in genuine need of help for it. Um, but I like that idea of sort of an ugly piece of furniture. I mean, yeah, most of I'm speaking just for myself. Most of the time, it's okay. It's not perfect, but it's okay. Sometimes it's not okay for people, and I think they need maybe the ugly furniture metaphor isn't apt. You know, people are in desperate need of help when it's at its worst. But yes, for this kind of like buzzing anxiety in the background, it's a companion, isn't it? It's something that's with you. There's better and worse times. I mean, mental health isn't a straight line. It kind of ebbs and flows, and there's sometimes it's unclear why, but sometimes it gets better, and there's no clear reason why it did. Just, oh, I'm feeling better these days than I did back then. Not for any noticeable reason. But yeah, that's an interesting way to think about it. You know, Kierkegaard, who I have a chapter on, he thought that anxiety is terribly unpleasant, and he suffered mightily with it himself. But it can be a teacher for us. With our through our anxiety, we can learn not only about our own freedom and our own finitude, but it's a way to sort of learn more about who we are and what matters to us. Anxiety is a kind of it tracks what matters to us deep down. If nothing mattered to us, I don't think we'd be anxious because
Mm.
anxiety is a kind of exposes us to fear of loss, uh, that sort of thing. So yeah, maybe anxiety can be a teacher.
Mm.
As we mentioned earlier in our conversation, it can probably also help us become more compassionate. That
Mm.
Buddhist idea.
I think
So
once you
yeah,
get attached to something, anxiety of losing something, well, you being a father of your cat, you probably have anxiety about them getting sick or losing them, for example.
yeah,
And it is a part of being alive. And if we become too consumed by anxiety, we stop living.
I think that's right.
Mm.
Um, I think that's right. Yeah, and it's easy to become too consumed. I think that happens. So what is the antidote? Maybe to try to develop tools of resilience, um, to recognize that being anxious is part of you. In being anxious, you announce your membership in the gigantic family of human beings. We're in good company. It's right that we would feel this way. But yes, I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, you don't want it to take over because it, bad anxiety will shrink your world, won't it? It'll make the world very small for you. Everything is fearful. There's danger around every corner. Everything is risky. And before you know it, you're not living a free life anymore. Yeah, in this way, anxiety constrains freedom, doesn't it?
Mm.
So I agree with that wholeheartedly.
All right. Well, final question to you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
If you could sit down and talk about anxiety with any of the philosophers you wrote about, who would it be? And I'm being greedy. I will ask you that question, leave it, and then go to the next one, and then finish.
Okay. Yeah. Um, yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think all of the six sort of philosophers or philosophical traditions that I talk about in my book, so Kierkegaard and Heidegger, William James, the British novelist Iris Murdoch, Arthur Schopenhauer, and the Stoics, all of them would be just sort of magnificent to sit down with and talk with about anxiety. I mean, each of them will, I think, accentuate different features of anxious experience. So I don't know if I could pick one. Uh, Maybe it would be like a Stoic. Maybe it would be Epictetus, the Stoic, just because how
You
cool
picked
would
the
it be
most frosty one.
but he's so old, you know? I mean, it would just be the most interesting, it'd be the most interesting conversation. Just to be able to talk with someone from millennia ago, I guess.
I like Marcus Aurelius. He seems
Yeah,
softer.
softer than Epictetus. Yeah, probably so. That's a good point. Maybe Seneca is the sort of the middle ground there then on the softness scale. But yeah, maybe that's the best answer. William James, I mentioned earlier in our
Of
conversation,
course.
I would love to sit with him. He's just a wonderful um, human being filled with insight and thoughtfulness.
Hmm.
Heidegger, maybe less so. Heidegger was a nasty guy. So I don't know. These are Iris Murdoch would be wonderful to sit with. I mean, she's a powerful novelist
Mhm.
who had some really interesting things to say about anxiety and the self. You know, she was really linked it to ideas of the self, which
Yeah.
again, there's Buddhist flavors there, of
Mhm.
course.
Mhm.
And you know, overcoming self egoistic, self-centered feelings, that sort of thing. So yeah, I don't know. It'd be great to sit down and talk with all of these people, I think. So, but it's a great question. Yeah.
No, thank you. I think that's all my questions. Do you have anything you
Mhm.
would say to our audience who let's oh, it's probably easier if I give you more of a well, someone who is intellectually curious, who doesn't
Mm.
mind reading or seeking out resources, but do find that they are a bit of a misfit, struggle with anxiety about all sorts of things, and find it really hard to share with people around them. Would there be anything you would say or recommend? It's all right if not. Even an exercise to try, a book to try and read.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. You know, I'm 47 years old, and you know, when I was growing up in Canada, where I grew up, there was not much talking about anxiety. I basically kept it hidden, or as much as I could, for most of my life.
I'm
I
surprised
mean,
to hear that.
I
I mean,
didn't even
because
know.
it being
I
such a
don't know when I.
universal thing, I can't imagine a world where people don't. But I guess I
Yeah.
know what you mean. They don't talk about it.
I mean, when I started having panic attacks at like age 9 or 10, I mean, I didn't even know what they were. I don't know if that I knew the English word anxiety at that point, let alone that other people had these feelings. And so, I mean, I guess it's felt so good to sort of just be able to talk more about it in print. I mean, my book has a lot of sort of memoir episodes. I mean, it's not primarily a memoir, but it has little interludes that
Mm,
draw on personal experience and past struggles and so on. That's felt very sort of therapeutic. It feels good to talk about it, to share with others rather than keeping things bottled up. So maybe that's a little sort of little piece of advice or an urging, if somebody's sort of hesitant to, if there's, if anxiety is causing you a lot of pain, it probably is a good idea to talk with others about it. Professionals, such as yourself, but also family members,
mm,
friends. It can help.
mm,
For reasons that you mentioned, it can help remind you that you're not alone, that we're
mm,
all sort of cut from the same human cloth and we're struggling together in a very similar way, I think, when push comes to shove. And that won't solve everything, but it is a helpful reminder, a soothing reminder, I think,
mm,
rather than just going at it alone,
mm.
privately, inwardly. So maybe that's all I can say
Yeah,
by way of advice, but I do mean it. It's helped me to kind of just open up about it.
it is powerful when you speak from your own experience.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Show
This
us
has
once
been great.
again your book so people know where to
Ah, yes.
find
Okay.
you.
Yep. Here it is. It's called A Danger Which We Do Not Know, A Philosophical Journey into Anxiety. And I don't normally recommend Amazon, I guess, but it's on sale now for $15 on Amazon. There's a big discount sale. So if you're interested, I would appreciate you
Just out of
checking it out.
curiosity, we have absolutely no control over whether or not they put our stuff on sale, isn't it? They just
That's right.
decide based on whatever algorithm or decision metric.
It's a global marketplace, and I don't
I
know
see.
how they make these decisions. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Well, but it is on sale now. Okay.
It is.
Well,
Yes.
I don't know when I am releasing this. Hopefully it is still on sale, but even not, I'm sure it is worth
Oh,
it.
yeah. Okay. Yeah, but it's true. Hopefully, it's not. It's still on sale when people hear
Mm.
this message for sure.
Thank you so, so much. Really appreciate chatting with you. Really enjoyed it. Thank you for being so human, so humble and personal and gracious with your time.
Oh, thank
Yeah,
you for
thank
the
you.
invitation. Yeah, this is a wonderful podcast, and I appreciate the invitation. Um,
Mhm.
I'll be I'll be watching all your episodes going forward. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All
All
right.
right.
And go with care and we'll touch base again.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you so
All
much,
right.
Amy.
Have
Have
a
a
good
wonderful day.
day. You too.
Same to
Bye
you.
bye.
Bye bye.